Good evening. Welcome to the 12th meeting of the Middle School Boundary Adjustment Advisory Committee, excuse me. Before we begin, I want to announce that all of the Middle School Boundary Adjustment Advisory Committee meetings are being live streamed on the district's YouTube channel. A link to that channel is posted on the Middle School Boundary Adjustment webpage, and it is also shared on the district's Facebook and Twitter feeds. To start this meeting, I'd like to share some very sad news. I'd like to begin the meeting by acknowledging that in the district, there are heavy hearts tonight. This morning, one of our 10th grade students died by suicide. And since July, 3 BSD graduates have also taken their lives. In this time of isolation for students, staff, and families, it is imperative that we talk about suicide prevention. It was already planned, but Saturday is the start of the district's Suicide Prevention Week. We want to encourage all families to have honest and open conversations about mental health. At this time, I ask that we take a moment of silence to reflect on those lives lost and to reflect on those people in our community who are suffering and who could use assistance. So thank you. Let's please take a moment. Thank you for that moment of reflection. It's a very painful time for that young person's family and friends and their community. And I know we keep our thoughts in for them in this terrible, terrible time. So to proceed, I'd like to say in terms of our normal approach. The advisory committee meetings are all public meetings, and all the materials are available to the public through the posting of those materials on the district's webpage. My name is Stephen Sparks, and I am the administrator for long-range planning for the Beaverton School District, and I will continue to be the one facilitating the meetings throughout the boundary recommendation process. As I noted, this is the 12th meeting, and this is our next to last or penultimate meeting. And our final meeting will be next week on October 15th. So if I would ask if we could have the PowerPoint, please shared up on the screen. And if we could go down to screen. Okay, so we have our agenda. You see the items that we will be talking about here in a moment. I do note that there will be public testimony at approximately 8:10 this evening. We have 9 people who have registered to speak. We had the registration open last week for the meeting that wound up being postponed. We took those names and we had a similar open period to register to speak this week. So we combined all the names that were submitted last week and this week to come up with our 9 folks who are going to testify. And by the end of this meeting, we'd like to be sure that we have a preliminary recommendation from the committee to move forward and allow the public the opportunity to have a week to consider this preliminary recommendation and allow public testimony to come to you before the meeting next week so that you can consider that testimony and consider any adjustments that you may want to discuss. So if we can go to the next slide, please. So as we do before every meeting, I'd like to be sure that we remind ourselves of the meeting expectations for this process. The expectations for the meeting are that we assume the best of intentions and that we all want the best for all of our students. We listen intently to understand better. We are open to considering new ideas. We remain open to influence and are not judgmental. We will consider all options, and there are no bad questions. Our interactions will be done with respect, and we will respect opposing viewpoints. This is the time I usually talk about public testimony and ask people in attendance to complete their yellow cards, but we don't need to do that here this evening. So if we could move to the next slide, please. So as a reminder, these are the objectives for the boundary adjustment. It is opening a new, creating a new attendance area for the Timberland area middle school. We're also trying to remove enrollment from the Stoller Middle School to bring the school in more alignment, approximately 90% of permanent capacity. We're going to review and adjust other boundaries as needed to accommodate the new middle school. And if warranted, we're going to look at other minor amendments to elementary and or high school attendance boundaries. Next, please. You'll see also here the policy JC factors. Those have been listed in the staff report as well. And I would like to note in the staff report, I think this will be an opportune time to note that we had prepared summaries of the board's discussions over the past year and have tried to make the summaries as broad as possible, but distill them into potential findings that the committee can make in response to the objectives and the policies of, or the factors in policy JC, as you see here. Next slide, please. So at the last meeting that we had, we were given direction from the committee that we have to reconsider the boundaries for Mountain View, specifically with Cooper Mountain and Chehalem elementary schools. And that was reflective, those changes that you requested were in response to the direction that we received in March. So the maps that you have seen in your packet tonight show that Chehalem West, so west of Murray Boulevard, is at Mountain View. The small portion of Cooper Mountain that was at Mountain View remains at Mountain View. And the larger portion of Cooper Mountain that went to Highland Park is going to remain attending Highland Park. So it is the status quo in terms of the boundaries for those two elementary schools and which middle school they go to. So we also have been requested to look for locations for Aloha Huber Park. This was, we're taking this as part of the conversation that the committee had in terms of, I believe the phrase was Lego blocks in terms of where could Aloha Huber go. And that's why you will see, you do see in your packet alpha, beta, and gamma maps. I was not in a fraternity, so trying to understand my Greek letters was a bit of a new thing for me. I didn't know gamma was second, or third rather. So you will see that we have moved Aloha Huber around and provided you that data of what that would mean in terms of where would Aloha Huber go. This is also a continuation of a request that the committee made back in March of understanding what would happen with Aloha Huber if it were to go to Highland Park. So we're looking at this as a continuation of that request because on September 3rd, we did not really have a time to talk about that. And then finally, we were requested to provide you with information regarding the dual language feeders at Meadow Park. You've seen some information that has been emailed to you today from Robert McCracken. And for those of you on the public who are wanting to have that data, that information will be posted on the webpage tomorrow, and you'll be able to see that. As we get to that question, I will ask Robert to provide an overview of what that information is, and if there are questions about how students that are in dual language are able to matriculate into high school in a dual language program, I'll ask Ken Streckmeyer to come on and provide a response to that. Next slide, please. So speaking of dual language students, so Robert, I'd like to have you give us a brief response to this, and Ken, if you could be on standby to talk about, being able to move into high school. So Robert, please take it away.
Okay, it's fairly straightforward. So within the Meadow Park boundary today, there are 121 dual language students. Most of them come from Barnes. That's where the dual language feeder originates. And most of them are in the portion of Barnes that feeds to Beaverton High School, a smaller group feeding to Sunset. And then there are some Oak Hills residents, and then there are an additional 29 students from other schools because dual language at Barnes brings students in from other schools. And we did ask about dual language students in Meadow Park taking classes with other students. And it sounds like their core classes are together, but electives are like any other student. So there is some intermixing once they get outside of their program, but not as much as the students in the general program. I don't have a slide here with the matriculation up to high school. I did send out that note today. They're fairly small numbers of students matriculating into high school at this point, although there will be more in the future. And I will, there's a raised hand.
We have, we have Monica.
Okay,
Earlier in this process, we had discussed Barnes specifically because it seemed like they had just started a full school walk.
Monica, you're breaking up. So let's maybe, through your computer.
Yeah, is that better?
Yeah, much better. Thank you.
Wonderful. We discussed earlier in this process that Barnes was changing to a school-wide dual language program. Is that still the case, or is that not?
Yeah, they're building that from the kindergarten up. So now the kindergarten and first grade are full dual language. That also requires bringing some students in from outside of their boundary. And just to be sure, the issue of part of Barnes feeding into Sunset and part of it feeding into Beaverton High School, that exists today. That's an issue that would exist even if we weren't doing this boundary adjustment.
Okay, while we're on this issue, does anybody have any questions about moving into high school on dual language that we can have Mr. Streckmeyer address? I don't see anybody's hands, so thank you. Let's move to the next slide. So one of the reasons why we delayed the project from proceeding earlier in August was the observation to, hey, let's, because we are in unprecedented times, let's see what our enrollment is. We go to a hard enrollment on October 1st, traditionally. we are now in October 8th, so we have a number that we're going to be operating under here this year. And so you receive this information here, I believe it was today, and you can see that we do have, some pretty big losses in terms of enrollment, and the vast majority of which are in the elementary school level. We have been looking at lots and lots of data. We are looking at other data points across the country to see if there's any kind of common shared trends that our districts are experiencing. So we are certainly keeping on top of this for lots of different reasons. But as you can see here from this front page, almost 1,600 students, that's a big number in terms of students that are not enrolled in the district as we anticipated. So we are looking, again, it is the situation here. The one thing that I would want to, I do want to make sure that we have noted in here, but the students that are on Flex Online are counted in this. So these are, the 1585 that you see are students that are not in a BSD program. They could be, there's, homeschooling, there's people who've moved, there are people who have gone to private school, there are people who, any number of things that those students are gone. And our projections are usually, really pretty good, but given this, again, unprecedented time, this is a very similar experience that all the districts are experiencing. Robert, did you want to add anything to this?
Yeah, just to note that the biggest drop or the biggest gap is in the kindergarten class. And that is pretty universal, just from reading the popular press and from what I've heard from other districts. Kindergarten is not required in the state of Oregon. And it's likely that a lot of parents just kept their kindergartners home this year. So that makes up the biggest group of elementary school students. At the other grades, and the summary has more of the detail in it if you want to see it. There are still losses, but they're not as big as kindergarten.
Steve, we have a hand up.
Yeah, I saw a hand.
And before we go to the hand, I just want to correct myself. The number that I was looking at for the 1585, that's the general ed students. If we take into consideration all the other programs which are noted below, our overall drop is 1,663. So that is a big number. So we have a hand up. I didn't see who that was, so.
I think it was Abdul.
Okay, Abdul.
So my question is, since in the directive we've been given before the whole pandemic and stuff, we were looking to 2021 as the target, and here we are just before 2021, and we have this drop. Although I think a drop doesn't really affect our decisions, but I think it would be good for us to know. Is there a certain middle school where we're seeing like most of the drop? Is it uniform across middle schools? Is it across the entire district? Or I think that information will be helpful for us.
So that information was part of the package that was sent out. I think, and I'm just trying to remember off the top of my head, I think it was like page 6 of that. I'm not 100% on that. Robert, if you could find that document and share that particular screen.
Yeah, 1 second.
I believe it's on page number 3.
We have here. So this is the projection versus the actual enrollment. And I can't, when I move my cursor around, do you guys get a little, do you see like a little target or something?
We can see the hand.
Yeah.
You can see the hand, okay.
Zoom in.
Robert, can you increase the size of that screen at all? There you go. Thank you.
Yeah. Yeah, so the actual enrollment we saw, the declines are, they're not super uniform. Stoller saw a decline of 200, but Stoller's also a much bigger school, roughly twice as big as some of our other middle schools. But the SUMA, actually the SUMA program was about the same. It came in really close to its projection. The K-8s stayed about the same, and then the options programs were pretty close to the projection. Where the losses are in comprehensive general education, and this is true for other school levels as well. A lot of those students, so right here, the 609, that's the current loss in 6th grade, 8th grade at comprehensive middle schools, and 319 of those are in flex. So there is some difference there in terms of students who have departed the district for one reason or another, most likely homeschool or online charter school. But then we saw a big shift into flex online as well. So where here's the net change, 266 students.
So while Robert is able to show you here the the distribution of the 609 students, Jason, I see it. The 609 students from general ed, the 226 we have not broken down by middle school. So Jason.
Yeah, hi, Steve, thanks. So it just, while we're at this page, I just wanted to draw people's attention. I mean, when you think of 609, and I'm not sure the variance, I was looking at another page, it was 640, but 600 plus students missing. I mean, this is take one of our smaller buildings that's been less populated, like say Whitford, and those students are not here. I mean, these are jarring numbers. And, time permitting, perhaps we can revisit this, but I just want to draw attention to that number. Even if you anticipate a few coming back quickly, you take what's already kind of an inadequate population and now divide it by 9 instead of 8. And we're going to have a number of schools that aren't at that 800 threshold that we've been told was really our floor for what we needed to have comprehensive programs. I think we can all relate to if we were running a business and we saw, this percentage of customers drop, we wouldn't be opening another store. In any case, enough on that for now. Perhaps we have time to revisit broader implications.
Okay, thank you. Anybody else on this slide? Okay, Sharice, was that you waving at flies or a question? Okay.
That's funny, waving at flies. That's
Yeah,
funny.
hey,
No, I was fixing my sleep.
Okay. All right, let's move along here, Robert, if you'd please.
1 second.
Okay, so here's the first part of our remaining middle schools to address. And this is perhaps, linchpin type of discussion, because from it we'll draw out other items. So as I mentioned earlier tonight, We have changed all the maps to show that Cooper Mountain the Cooper Mountain feeder pattern as it exists today will remain in any future boundary. So if you look at the bottom graphic there, that shows the boundary that's in the maps, and that reflects the current attendance boundary or feeding pattern for Cooper Mountain Elementary School. Also, we have removed the Chehalem West from going to Highland Park and kept it at Mountain View. So everything that exists today for Chehalem West and for Cooper Mountain Elementary School is reflected in the maps that we have for you this evening. So next slide, please. As I shared with you, we have the alpha, beta, and gamma maps. The alpha map is showing Aloha Huber going to Highland Park. This was something that was requested back in March. We have shown it to you, and for reasons suggested in the staff report, this has some concern, that we have concerns with this particular solution, particularly given how Chehalem West is now not going to go to Highland Park, or likely will not go to Highland Park as you requested. And again, we haven't decided on that, but I'm just making that note. We lose that, that contiguous attendance boundary if that were to happen. Map beta shows Aloha Huber going to Meadow Park, which is another map that you've seen before. And most recently, again, that was in March, and then when we came back in September. Map gamma is showing Aloha Huber going to Mountain View. We've talked about this at different times throughout the process and have discounted it for different reasons. The increase in poverty, the size of Mountain View in relationship to other schools, but it still has that, that factor of proximity to Mountain View for those families. It's also an Aloha High School feeder, and this would keep it with a full Aloha High School feeder middle school. The drawbacks remain. One last thing I would note is that while the Aloha Huber would be proximate to Mountain View, those students would continue to be bused to middle school, given the speed limits and vehicle counts at Farmington Road. And Kinnaman is not fully sidewalked. So those students, instead of currently riding a bus to Five Oaks, they would ride a bus to Mountain View. And Mr. Beaver is here to answer any transportation questions on that matter, or any of those transportation questions if you'd like to note that. So I believe, Robert, if we go to the next slide, I think that is the end of that particular item. We do have the demographics as we have provide for all of those maps. But Robert, let's go back to the slide that shows the three. Thank you. And what I'd like to do at this time, making a note of the time, let's start our deliberations on alpha, beta, gamma amongst the committee. And I'll stop with that. Who would like to start us off on this particular discussion item?
Steve, we have Michelle first.
Michelle, please lead us off.
Okay, so we're going to talk about Cooper Mountain first or Lower Huber first?
What I would like to do here is, because you asked for us to show Cooper Mountain and Highland Park, or I'm sorry, Cooper Mountain and Chehalem as they are today, that would be a perfect place to start that conversation, because as I noted, you have not come to a conclusion on that particular discussion item, because you directed us to provide you with that information, but that was not a vote to say that we want the boundaries at X.
Right. So I guess I still feel that Cooper Mountain should be at Mountain View. I also believe the tail of Hazeldale should be at Mountain View, and that does make a contiguous boundary, and it reunites Cooper Mountain. So we're not doing a split feeder into middle schools. Chehalem is less clear to me. I think I'd have to see what effect that would have on the capacity. Because right now, the other thing at Mountain View is we have a small number of mountainside bound kids. It's a portion of Chehalem and a portion of Cooper Mountain. So if we could resolve some of those splits, Cooper Mountain could easily go to Highland or Mountain View in terms of proximity. But I think as they continue to build housing, in that Cooper Mountain and the tail of Hazeldale, the equity gap will also widen as they build more new and expensive housing in that portion. And if that goes to Mountain View, that's going to help them.
So to provide, just to be my active listening here, what you're referring to in terms of the Hazeldale tail, that is the area of yellow that is west of Southwest 175th and south of Kenneman Road. And that area is, as you observed, currently underdeveloped, particularly along, focused along the Shoals Ferry Road area, the more flat portion of the Hazeldale tail. We did talk about the Hazeldale tail quite a bit at the start of this year. So at the January and February meetings, we talked about this quite a bit. And the reason why the Hazeldale tail was trimmed at this time and fed to Highland Park was the speculative potential boundary for a future elementary school for the South Cooper Mountain area, where the district has already acquired land for that elementary school, which is located a little northwest of the high school site.
But is there a timeline for that school? Because I guess I don't want to base a middle school boundary on a hypothetical school, provided that Hazeldale also has a lot of capacity, right? They got a brand new building that was double the size of their previous building, and they could accommodate those students.
That's correct. So in terms of, to answer your question of timetable, there is no timetable. It will require a capital bond to be passed. It will require that the capital bond include building a new school on the site. So there are, and it would require the passage of a capital bond. So there are a number of ifs that have to occur in order to, assure that an elementary school would be there. And you're absolutely right. We've put that area in the Hazeldale attendance boundary because there is room in Hazeldale to accommodate that growth. Okay, are there any other hands up in terms of talking about the Cooper Mountain Chehalem question?
So we have Divya.
Divya.
Hello. I have a question. It's on gamma, option gamma. So just taking it as is, do we know what type of FRL improvements there are or changes there are for both Mountain View and Highland Park if we swapped Chehalem West into Highland Park and all of Cooper Mountain into Mountain View.
So let me see if I understand you correctly. If we had all of Cooper Mountain in Mountain View, Chehalem West at Highland, and all of Aloha Huber going to Mountain View?
Correct.
Okay, I know we prepared that back a while ago.
Yeah, I couldn't find that. That is us asking a question.
Yeah,
Maybe Robert knows. I don't know.
Yeah, I have to ask Robert to dig through it. I don't know if we would be able to, find that here tonight, but I know we have done that analysis.
For me, that is an important data point because I definitely don't like the islands in option alpha. So I'm trying to look at creating a continuous boundary line. And knowing that data point will help us figure out between beta and gamma what other changes we can propose or maybe discuss here in the meeting.
Okay. All right, well, before we get to that point, we need to decide on the Cooper Mountain and Chehalem West question. So I'm going, unless anybody has anything else to ask about that particular item, I'd like to propose, and I'm going to ask the question. I'd like to ask the question and put it to the committee vote on what to do with Cooper Mountain and Chehalem West. The two options are what we showed you as a result of your March discussion and the map that you see here today, which shows, as I said, current boundaries remaining. If the committee were to agree to the map as it's shown right here, well, then that issue is settled. And then we need to move to the next question, which is, Aloha Huber. If the committee wishes to, revisit the March proposal, then we can start asking those questions as well, which will, I would also include the observation made by Michelle when it comes to the Hazeldale tail. So any questions before we proceed?
Steve, we have two hands up. First is Michelle and second is Abhijit.
Okay, Michelle.
Can we vote on Cooper Mountain and Chehalem separately, or are they? Okay, thanks.
Abhijit.
So before I vote, just wanted to clarify one thing. The previous map, we had the Cooper Mountain Park going to Highland and Chehalem to Mountain View. That was the vote 7. And I think we received a lot of public feedback that essentially is reflected in your next map, where Cooper Mountain remains in Highland and Chehalem remains in Mountain View. And that's the map you're asking us to vote for on?
Right. So what I'm going to ask you to vote on is as you see here at the bottom graphic, you asked us to bring that to you here for this evening. We have, and I will ask, as Michelle queried, I will ask on each elementary school. So the first vote will be about Cooper Mountain, and it would be asking if Cooper Mountain Elementary School should retain its current feeding pattern. Okay. Mike, I see your hand. Mike is waving at flies also. Anybody else have a question before we begin? Okay. So I will ask for hand votes from you to, actually, no, I'm not going to ask you for hand votes. I'm going to go down and I'm going to call you by random name and it just give me a yes or a no to the question. Okay. First question. Does the committee want to forward a recommendation where Cooper Mountain Elementary School maintains its current feeding patterns where approximately 70% of the students go to Highland Park and approximately 30% go to Mountain View, as reflected in the graphic on the bottom of this page, okay? First, I'm going to ask Charisse.
Yes to current feeder pattern.
Marnie.
Yes to current feeder pattern.
Christy.
No to the current feeding pattern.
John.
Yes.
Jason.
Yes.
Sean.
Did you say Sean?
I did, Sean.
Oh, yes.
Mike.
Yes.
Michelle.
No.
Yasmin.
Yes.
Matt. Matt, you there?
I am, yes.
Oh, there you are. Okay. Abhijit.
Yes.
Abdul.
Yes.
Divya.
Current feeder patterns, no.
Monica.
No.
Okay, by my count, the yeses have it 10-4. I look to Ken and Robert. Do you have the same vote count? You need to unmute yourself, Mr. Struckmeyer.
Sorry. Yes, that's what I have.
Okay. Robert, you have the same? Okay. All right. Next question. Chehalem West. Should Chehalem West retain its feeder pattern by going to Mountain View as illustrated in the graphic at the bottom of this page? Okay. And I will again call randomly here. Abdul.
Sorry, the question again?
The question is Chehalem West going to Mountain View as it currently does. So it's maintained the existing feeder pattern for Chehalem West.
Okay, yes.
Okay. Jason.
Yes to current feeder pattern.
Marnie. Marnie.
Yeah.
Okay. Abhijit.
Yes.
Christy.
Yes.
Divya.
Yes.
Mike.
Yes.
Yasmin.
Yes.
John.
Yes.
Charisse.
Yes.
Michelle.
Yes.
Matt.
Yes.
Monica.
Yes.
And Sean.
Yes.
Okay. The yeses have it. All right. So what this means, Robert, if you could go down to the gamma or the Latin maps. Thank you. So what we have here for resolution then is where should Aloha Huber go now that you have recommended, actually, let me rephrase. There was a question put by Michelle on whether or not the Hazeldale Tail should be added to the Mountain View area. We don't have that data for you here tonight. We will have to go back and resurrect it. We do have it, but it's something that we would have to come back on. So the question I have for the committee at this time is, should the Hazeldale, do you want us to return at the next meeting for a final vote on the Hazeldale Tail being added to Mountain View rather than Highland Park? Okay. If you don't want to consider that change, that's okay. You just won't get that information at the last meeting. So the question to you right now, so this is vote 3. The question to you right now, and again, I will poll you at random. Do you want to include the Hazeldale Tail? Again, that's the area currently assigned to Highland Park. That is the South Cooper Mountain area west of Southwest 170th or 175th and south of Kemmer Road. Does anybody have any doubt about where that area is?
Steve,
Yes.
Divya has her hand up.
Divya.
I would like to defer voting on this to maybe in a few minutes because I like to see what happens to Aloha Huber. It may be possible that once you put the Aloha Huber, there is no room to bring in that tail from Hazeldale. So can we defer this vote, please?
That is a fair comment. Do I, just by general head nod or head shake, do you agree with that suggestion? I'm seeing more head nodding than head shaking, so we will table that question for a later discussion. So we will move directly into the Aloha Huber question. Now, I don't want to call a vote right off the top here, but I do want to open it up for deliberation on with the committee, what they would like to, what questions they have about Aloha Huber and, the locations where it goes, any thoughts that you may have. So do we have any hands up, whether that's physical or otherwise? Who wants to kick us off? Jason?
Yeah, hi. Of these, I favor gamma. To me, beta is kind of a non-starter. From previous calculations, I believe that would actually be moving it from if I remember right, from its 3rd closest school to its 4th closest. I can't think what we would tell the community on why we would be doing that to them. Alpha is compelling when you look at the free and reduced lunch numbers. It is unlike some of the other things we've considered. There is the opportunity to make a more, it makes Highland more balanced in line with the district average, but that's one of our factors. And when I weigh it against the ability to be in a clean feeder system as opposed to being almost the only, in fact, they may at that point be the only Aloha feeding students there at Highland. And also it's not just proximity, it's the extreme proximity they have to Mountain View. I just think on balance, gamma makes the most sense for that community. And to really consider something else, I would want to actually hear significant feedback from the communities that they would be asking for something different other than the school in their backyard.
Okay, thank you, Jason. Anybody else?
Steve, we have 3 hands up.
Okay.
First is Abhijit,
Okay.
then Michelle, and then Monica.
Okay, Abhijit?
Yeah, so I want to talk about these options. And I think when we stop, the proximity argument makes sense. but the break gave me time to go back and look at the public testimony. So one thing I wanted to bring up to all of us is on Feb 25, we received a public testimony from an Aloha Uber parent, Miss Wood. And this is what she said. She said 1/3 of Aloha Hooper Elementary School, K-5, has a two-way Spanish immersion program enrollment. So 1/3 of the elementary school is enrolled in two-way Spanish immersion. And essentially for most of these kids, the dual language pathway ends at elementary. And in her testimony on Feb 25, she asked, can the Aloha Hooper feed to Meadow Park, which is option beta. So I looked at what we have done with dual language in our committee, and I'll admit, when we started this process, I didn't know much about the dual language. In fact, it was Monica who brought that to the committee's attention on the significance of dual language pathway and its continuation. That partly resulted in our Barnes decision maintaining it entirely in Meadow Park. But there are, out of the 30 odd elementary schools in Beaverton School District, there are only 3 elementary schools that have two-way Spanish immersion. One is Barnes, that I just talked about. The second one is Vose Elementary. If you remember, when we started the map exercise, Vose Elementary was actually fed out of Whitford for some time. And we received a public testimony. It was by a Vose parent. She gave it in Spanish. We got the translation in English. And essentially she expressed the same concern that should you move Vose out of Whitford, the dual language pathway will end at elementary. And from that point on, we fed Vose and Whitford. Right? So 2 out of the 3 elementaries that have Spanish immersion, we have answered the call and maintained their dual language pathway to continue to Meadow Park. So doing Aloha Hooper anywhere other than Meadow Park is essentially going to end their dual language pathway at elementary. And the one thing I also want to bring up here is what Ms. Wood said at the end of her testimony. She said most of the HP parents work in the evening, they cannot attend your committee meetings. And if any other school had this dual language problem, whether it's, let's say, Cooper Mountain or Oak Hills or any other elementary up north of 26 for that matter, I think we would have heard a lot. So I think lack of not hearing should not why we should ignore it. So I was originally of the opinion that Jason was saying that, hey, let's go for the closest one. But after looking at the two-way Spanish immersion and what this committee has done towards maintaining these pathways, I feel like it would be really unfair to not do the Aloha Hooper, Meadow Park, and let them have the dual language pathway continuation.
Okay, thank you. Michelle.
So I like the idea of Gamma for proximity, but one thing I really want the committee to keep in mind is that if we go that route, the most economically disadvantaged middle school will have no special programming as it stands now. I could stomach, putting a high FRL number at Whitford in order to keep that dual language program intact. They currently have SUMA. It sounds like SUMA might stay there. Meadow Park has dual language, also has SUMA. So we're going to create, I'm very conscious of the Mountain View boundary and that it will be very economically disadvantaged. It will have no SUMA. It will have no Rachel Carson. It will have no dual language as far as we know. And I just want that to sort of be in your heads. And also, I know we talked about this in the north too, but in the south, now you're going to have adjacent boundaries with Highland and Mountain View having very, very different FRL numbers.
Okay, and something I would want to just note for the conversation for the dual language, when it comes to Aloha Huber, those students do feed to Five Oaks currently, and there is no dual language at Five Oaks. Mr. Struckmeyer, do you want to speak to the items that, or the issue that Michelle raised when it came to the special programs and the like?
Yes, I think if we're talking about dual language, one way that we achieve an ability for students to matriculate is through boundaries. And as you noted earlier, that is not something that currently exists all the way K-12. And so there is a process underway for us to reconsider how administrative transfers might be a vehicle to do that, or creating other vehicles similar to options programs so that kids, regardless of where they are, have pathways straight through. And again, the SUMA placement or the Rachel Carson placement, there's work that will be done in teaching and learning to try to determine how to best serve students as proximately as possible, but also being thoughtful about the placement of those schools in areas where we have capacity. Doesn't make sense to have schools considerably under capacity and to have other schools way over. So that work will be done in conjunction with the recommendation moving forward from the team.
Monica, I believe you were next.
Hi, so can you hear me with the headphones better? Yeah. So for me, option alpha is I just can't support that one because of the isolation for Aloha Huber not being, kind of being that island. And I'm trying to balance all of the different factors we have, the FRL and then the high school feeders. So that one just doesn't meet enough criteria to justify putting them in an island. So beta and gamma seem to be better options. The dual language component of beta is a issue for me. It seems like it would be easier for the community without having, and if the provisions exist where they can be moved around in order to maintain a pathway, then that's okay. But either way, there's still schools. For beta, there's one school, Meadow Park, and for gamma, there's Meadow Park and Mountain View that are both above 50% FRL. So whichever direction we go, I would like to see if there's anything that we can do to adjust that. Any other trade that we could make, or I don't know what we could do, but that was my hope. But both of them kind of look better in terms of high school feeder patterns and other components for me.
Okay, thank you. Jason, I saw that your hand up, but before I turn over to you, Debbie, did we have anybody else with their hands up?
Yes, we have Sharice and Divya and then Jason.
Okay, then Sharice.
All right, so not to dump a big grenade on all of this, but clearly we're not super happy with any of these options because they're not great options, right? We know that we inherited boundaries that don't necessarily make sense for these kids. And I think that in reading the public comment that's come in since our last meeting, I think people are looking at us going, are you thinking about these kids, right? And I know we all are, but we're not doing any service to these kids in the South by changing all these boundaries around arbitrarily. We haven't hit the JC factors. We haven't lowered Stoller. I keep going back to, what are we doing? Why are we moving things around just to move them, right? The entire district needs to be redrawn. We've had a ton of population growth and movement. Is it worth changing these southern boundaries? We haven't even fixed Stoller. That's where I'm at.
Okay, thank you. Divya.
I echo Charis's comments, but let's talk about Mountain View for now. So I don't also like option alpha for the same reasons Monica has brought up, the isolation for that community. I'm between beta and gamma, mostly towards gamma because of the, it's no different for those schools who are they're already going to 5 Oaks today that does not do dual language. But there is a chance to improve with beta. However, I like gamma, keep going back there, because if you want to improve the FRL numbers, the concern Monica brought up, we should revisit the votes we did just a few minutes ago about Chehalem West and Cooper Mountain. There may be opportunity to swap those regions and keep Aloha Uber into Mountain View to improve FRL. But if we can't go back there, that's fine. I would rather lean towards gamma.
Okay, thank you. Jason?
Yeah, just real quick. And by the way, I certainly share the viewpoint Therese just expressed, but focused on this one thing, I just wanted to follow up on something Michelle had said about the lack of special programs. That I'm frankly not terribly interested in that as any meaningful mitigating factor, because those programs are separate. You know, I think maybe, if I remember right, in Summa, they might overlap with PE and electives, and with Rachel Carson, maybe only PE. It just doesn't meaningfully change the building. In fact, I think it gives us a false sense of security by looking at the overall buildings numbers have changed, but it doesn't really change what the numbers are in those core classrooms. Anyway, my 2 cents.
Okay. Marnie?
Can you hear me okay with this microphone?
Need to either get it closer or turn it up, or?
Is that better?
Yeah.
Okay. So the free and reduced lunch thing bugs me too. Probably echo what Cherie said. But given that where we are now and what we need to do, and given that we're making a recommendation, could we potentially, if we, depending on where we put Aloha Huber and what that does to numbers, can we make a recommendation that we say we realize this is not great, but we were constricted by the boundaries in general, so that we're saying this was a bigger problem, here's what we can do unless you do something more. Is that an option?
So it's always, I mean, the committee can add any comments it would like to add as part of its recommendation to provide context to that recommendation. So what you have said is by no small means misunderstood by the district in, from top to bottom. Our socioeconomics are defined by location. It's just a fact, and that in order to achieve balance through attendance boundaries, that is a possibility, but then you look at the impacts associated with that. You've heard me say before the 1974 busing model of putting kids on a bus for a couple hours to put them in a different school, which my wife, for example, did. I experienced in California. So in terms of passing that along as a comment, yeah, that's certainly okay to do. I'm going to ask Mr. Struckmeyer to, turn his camera on. I think I'd like to ask a question that I think I'm hearing from the committee, and it's generally how will the teaching and learning department, given the budget restrictions that we have, but how does the teaching and learning department look at schools of higher free reduced lunch in terms of, are there additional resources, programming, or the like that would be allocated to a Mountain View or a Meadow Park or whatever middle school that has a higher FRL than another middle school?
Right. So one thing to keep in mind is that all 8 of our neighborhood middle schools serve kids in poverty today. However, there are some schools that have greater numbers of students in poverty. So we have to keep that in mind, that everywhere we have those. In the past, you had to reach a certain threshold. For example, 40% of students in your school needed to qualify for free or reduced meals before any additional teachers or any additional money to the discretionary budget of the principal was allocated. There was a review process over the last year, and because we know that resources should follow kids that most need it, there was a change to the allocation process that was initiated with the allocation for the 2020-2021 school year. And so now there's weighting based on poverty. So any child in poverty qualifies for additional dollars that follow that child to all schools. So this year, all 8 neighborhood middle schools received a supplemental amount of staffing and supplemental dollars that went to the discretionary budget of the teacher, excuse me, of the principal. And that discretionary budget can buy materials. It can be used to increase labor for assistants that are going to help students thrive in classrooms. And it can be for all sorts of materials that enrich the curriculum for those students.
Ken, to paraphrase what you're saying for my own understanding, are you saying that the allocation is based on the number of students rather than the percentage of the enrollment?
That is accurate. So there's a preliminary wash of allocation for every child everywhere. And then there's a supplemental money that is added based on the number of students that qualify for free or reduced meals.
Okay, so the fact that Stoller, and I'll just pick on Stoller for now, it has a lower free reduced lunch percentage does not mean that that principal does not get an additional allocation. It's just going to be a smaller allocation because there's fewer students that go to Stoller as opposed to Five Oaks.
That is accurate.
Okay, thank you. Charisse.
Sorry, just a point of information about that, Mr. Struckmeyer. And is that separate from Title I funding, or is that allocation of Title I funding that comes into the district? And is any of that funding being utilized now for distance learning, or is that separate?
In our district, Title I funding is a pre-K 5 phenomenon. It's my understanding that this is general fund allocation, and it's the formula of taking general fund dollars to follow those students. And then, Charisse, remind me the second part of your question. Oh, about distance learning now and the allocation. Yes. So during this year, the resources to support all students, we use that model. So in distance learning, those communities that have kids with more kids that qualify for free and reduced meals have more resources to support those students during distance learning.
Thank you.
Steve Abhijit has his hands up.
Okay. A note before Abhijit goes, I'm going to call a vote next. So if anybody has any additional comments, questions about alpha, beta, gamma, please raise your hands for Debbie. Abhijit.
Thank you, Steve. There were comments on FRL and distance, and both these things, I also struggled with when coming to option beta. But here's the thing, with Meadow Park specifically, FRL numbers, we had other options to reduce Meadow Park's FRL. They all involved Oak Hills, and this committee's majority ignored that. That's okay. But now to turn around and say because of that, Aloha Hubert feeding into Meadow Park is incorrect, that doesn't sound right. And it's not because of just FRL, but if you are Aloha Hubert parent in your language program, and if you look at where you are today versus Meadow Park. So Aloha Hubert Park goes to Five Oaks, which is probably as far, if not farther than Meadow Park. On school's website, it lists 62% FRL, so about comparatively the same. And with Meadow Park's infrastructure dual language program, these kids, their dual language pathway will not end, right? Versus in Five Oaks, it ends. and then that leaves the distance part. Steve has made it clear ample of times. If AHP was walking distance to Mountain View, I think that might have changed, or that might have added another discussion point. But since these kids have to be bused anyways, if you are a AHP parent, what would you prefer? Your kid is going to be in the bus. Do you want to continue your language pathway or not? I think that's really the discussion here to me. Thanks.
Okay. Thank you, Abhijit. All right. Before I move to a vote, does anybody else have any questions or items to discuss or comment upon? Debbie, do you have anybody?
Michelle just raised her hand.
Okay, Michelle?
I think in reality, just based on proximity of Aloha Huber to Mountain View, I think you're going to provide the buses and you're going to see a lot of those kids walking. But the advantage here is that if they miss the bus, they can walk, and that could be of benefit to those students.
Okay, thank you. All right. I'm not seeing any other hand waving. I am not seeing any other hands raised. So I'm going to move to the first vote. The first vote is going to be on alpha, and that's going to be a straight yes or no type of question. The question is, should Aloha Huber, as illustrated in map alpha, the one on the left, should Aloha Huber go to Highland Park? And again, I'm going to go in a random manner. So first, Jason.
No.
Sean.
No.
Mike.
No.
Michelle.
No.
Yasmin.
No.
Abdul.
No.
Divya.
No.
Monica.
No.
Abhijit.
No.
Matt.
No.
John.
No.
Christy.
No.
Marnie.
No.
Charisse.
No.
Okay. That was the easy vote. Now we're going to go to the more challenging votes. The next two votes are going to be on maps maps beta and maps gamma. Okay. The first one I'm going to ask is about map beta. For the record and everybody listening, map beta shows Aloha Huber going in its entirety to Meadow Park Middle School. Instead of going to Five Oaks Middle School, as Aloha Huber currently does, it would instead go to Mountain View. The committee is, some members of the committee have expressed pros and cons to each of, for map beta. So we're going to start with that question. Any questions on that question I'm going to ask? Okay, this is going to be a straight yes/no vote. Again, should Aloha Huber be allocated and feeding to Meadow Park Middle School? So I will start with Mike.
No.
Then Yasmin.
No.
Divya.
No.
Jason.
No.
Abhijit.
Yes.
John.
Yes.
Sean.
No.
Marnie.
No.
Abdul.
No.
Michelle.
No.
Christy.
No.
Charisse,
No.
Matt,
No.
Monica.
Yes.
Okay, by my count, the noes have it 11-3. All right, so vote. This vote is going to be, well, hopefully no surprise here. So the question is going to be called, should Aloha Huber be a feeder to Mountain View Middle School? Again, pros and cons have been identified by the committee members. You've talked about, the issues that you're struggling with, not the least of which is the free reduced lunch percentage at Mountain View that would potentially result. So, any questions before we go to the vote on Gamma?
Steve, Divya has her hand up.
Divya.
So on this Gamma map, before we vote, I wanted to ask, what is a possibility for us to look at? I know we voted on this just a few minutes ago, but Chehalem West and Cooper Mountain. Is there any way we can look at those together, or no? That's a done deal.
We've made a vote, and unless I hear a second from anybody else who wants to reconsider the first two votes about Cooper Mountain and Chehalem, or even just Chehalem, if I don't hear a second, we're going to move on with the Gamma vote. Sean?
I would like to look at that too, along with Divya.
Okay, so I will amend the vote. I'm going to table Gamma vote for a reconsideration. And Divya, if I understand you correctly, it's going to be, is it reconsidering Cooper Mountain and Chehalem, or Cooper Mountain, or just Cooper Mountain, or just Chehalem?
It's both. It's basically swapping Chehalem West and all of Cooper Mountain from its current middle schools.
So all of Chehalem West and all of Cooper Mountain would go to Highland?
No, Chehalem West will go into Highland Park. All of Cooper Mountain will go into Mountain View.
Okay, gotcha. All right. So this is a vote to ask, should we reconsider the first two votes taken to, to specifically consider all of Cooper Mountain going to Mountain View and Chehalem West going to Highland Park in consideration of the map Gamma. Okay, and this will be a simple yes, no. Okay, so hang on, let me make notes. Okay, so I will start with Yasmin.
No, actually, I was just about to say, can you repeat that again?
Okay,
Yeah.
so the vote is to reconsider the first two votes.
Mm-hmm.
That would mean undoing the vote to put to keep the existing feeder pattern for Chehalem West and Cooper Mountain Elementary School. So what the result would be is all of Cooper Mountain will go to Mountain View Middle School, and Chehalem West will go to Highland Park, all in support of map Gamma.
My vote is no.
Okay, Monica,
Yes.
John,
No.
Charisse,
No.
Sean,
Yes.
Abdul.
I guess, can I ask a question? I kind of had my hand raised there.
Okay, ask it.
So the question is, how does that swap affect the free and reduced lunch?
Well, the presumption is that it would add more, add students to Mountain View that are not on free or reduced lunch, and it would improve the percentage, but I don't have that data in front of me that I can tell you what that result would be.
Okay, so that's like, we're almost like voting blindly here, but I'll just say yes.
Okay. Matt?
No.
Jason?
No.
Divya?
Yes.
Michelle?
Yes.
Marnie?
No.
Mike?
No.
Abhijit?
No.
Christy?
Yes.
My count is 8-7 with the noes taking the question. Ken, Robert, do you have the same result? Robert is nodding.
Yes.
Okay, so the vote result is we will not reconsider the first two votes that, for considering map gamma, that the existing feeder patterns for Cooper Mountain and Chehalem West will be maintained. So I will go back to the question on map gamma. This is a straight yes, no question. Should Aloha Huber Park become a feeder school to Mountain View Middle School? Okay, any questions about that question? Okay, so again, going in a random order. Abhijit?
No.
Charisse?
No.
Sean?
Yes.
Abdul?
Yes.
Matt?
Yes.
Jason?
Yes.
Monica?
No.
Christy?
Yes.
Divya?
Yes.
Yasmin?
Yes.
Mike?
Yes.
Marnie?
Yes.
Michelle?
Yes.
John?
Yes.
Okay, the yeses have it 11-3. So as a result, we now have a question about both Highland Park and Cedar Park, which for at all intents and purposes are answered by the vote on gamma. So with that, I would look at map gamma and ask the committee, recognizing the time, it's 7:54, and we will be going to public testimony here shortly. Looking at map gamma, and you can see the Meadow Park area in green and Cedar Park area in pink. Do any of you have any questions about the boundary of Meadow Park or Cedar Park as shown in map gamma? I'm not seeing any hands on the screen, but Debbie, are you seeing any there?
Divya just raised her hand.
Divya?
So this voting is going to happen as drawn in gamma, and we are not going to I guess my question is Meadow Park is not used as much while there is still the objective that we have not met. So we are ignoring that Stoller for now and just voting on the lines the way it is drawn on Meadow Park and Cedar Park for now.
So I'm going to ask the question specifically about each middle school.
Okay.
But yes, that's what we have in front of us right now, based on the other prior votes that have been taken.
Okay.
Jason, you had your hand up.
Oh, I just
Fly swatting, we'll call it.
yeah, call it fly swatting. You've heard what I'm going to say, and while I'll be voting no.
Okay. Okay. All right. Any other questions about these two boundaries? Okay. So let me make another note here. Okay, so first question, looking at map gamma, which is the map on the right side of the screen, specifically for Meadow Park, which is the area in green. Does the committee agree and forward the area in green as the attendance boundary for Meadow Park? Okay. First, Divya.
No.
Marnie.
Yes.
Abhijit.
No.
Jason.
No.
Christy.
Yes.
Charisse.
No.
John.
Yes.
Mike.
Yes.
Michelle.
Yes.
Monica.
No.
Sean.
Yes.
Yasmin.
Yes.
Abdul.
Yes.
I'm sorry.
Matt, I think.
I've missed one of you.
It's me.
It's Matt.
Oh, Matt. I'm sorry, Matt.
Matt says yes. Yes.
Okay, the yeses have it. 9 to, what would that be? 9 to 6, or
9 to 5.
9 to 5. Okay, next question is going to be showing with gamma Cedar Park Middle School. Okay, as shown in pink in map gamma, the map on the right. Okay, since I forgot you, Matt, we'll start with you. Matt.
Yeah.
Okay, Charisse.
No.
Yasmin.
Yes.
Sean.
Yes.
Abdul.
Yes.
John.
Yes.
Abhijit.
Yes.
Marnie.
Yes.
Mike.
Yes.
Divya.
Yes.
John.
Yes.
Yasmin, or no, I already asked Yasmin, sorry. Michelle.
Yes.
Christy,
Yes.
Jason.
No.
Okay, the yeses have it on that question. Okay. So that's it for voting here right now. We are going to go to public testimony here in a moment. We want to bring our public testimony folks on. And I also know that we've been at it here for an hour and a half. I would like to call a 10-minute break. We will start promptly at 8:10 for public testimony to allow people to stretch your legs and maybe get something to eat. So we'll be right back at 8:10. Okay, to the committee, please turn your video on as we move into our public testimony. We're currently making sure everybody's names match to those who we invited to speak, and we will get started with that here in just a moment. All right, thank you for returning to us here. We are going to resume our meeting, and we're going to, at this time, invite the public members who have submitted their names to come on. As you can see up here, they are starting to filter onto the Zoom meeting list. We will be asking each person to come up and speak here as we proceed. Each person will have 2 minutes to provide testimony. And there, as you can see, is a 2-minute timer to help people keep track of where we're at in the time. So with no further ado, I'm going to call Mr. Taylor, because I saw him pop up first. Mr. Taylor, why don't you start us off?
Thank you, Stephen. Gosh, nothing like going first. Appreciate that. I wanted to speak tonight, and thank you. Appreciate your time, everybody, and everybody's efforts here on the committee. Just more in the abstract about this process and what's been going on. Stephen, I have to commend you. You're a great facilitator in keeping this committee on task and on point. I can see that your clear objective is to deliver a community-based boundary adjustment that the board can vote on, that they can point to the community and say, hey, you had your chance for input, you had your chance to weigh in on this. But I get the sense watching these meetings and listening to the testimony and the votes is that you've lost sight of your 4 objectives: to create a boundary for timberland, to reduce the population for Stoller, and then to make minor tweaks. What I'm seeing is a real focus on free and reduced lunches, balancing socioeconomic issues here at each of these middle schools. What I think, and I'm seeing it in the faces, the countenance of your committee members, Steve, is they're frustrated by this process. Just when you watch as a, with no dog in this fight, they say that they haven't fixed the problems, right? You're focusing on the wrong things. What you're doing is moving these schools around from one middle school to another. And I think you have to appreciate, Steve, the impact this has on communities. You're moving communities of families, of neighbors, of soccer teams, of basketball teams. You're moving communities and separating them. And so I just want you to focus a little bit more on what your committee is suggesting to you and listen to their voices. Thank you for your time.
Thank you very much, Mr. Taylor. Okay, next on my list is Ms. Pineda. I hope I pronounced your name correctly. Forgive me if I did not. Ms. Pineda, will have you turn on your video as well, please. And you're muted as well. Okay.
Okay.
Good.
Okay. Hi.
Please
All
begin.
right. You ready? Okay, great. Thank you to the committee members for allowing me to speak tonight. Please bear with me as public speaking is not one of my strengths. My name is Christy, and I currently have one son at Aloha High and 2 sons at Hazeldale Elementary, one of which is set to go to Mountain View Middle School next school year. Because I did not think my family would be directly impacted by the middle school adjustment decisions, I've ignored the meeting notices and paid little attention to the process. Wasn't this supposed to be about Stoller in Timberland? I recently have been hearing that you are considering changes, and then I heard tonight even voting already on these changes in the southern area, for example, moving Cooper Mountain and or Lower Yuba to Mountain View. Now just does not seem to be the right time for any changes, especially if there's not an immediate urgent problem, which it doesn't sound like there is. We need stability for our kids in an already unstable and uncertain current environment. The unnecessary upheaval of changing the feeder pattern in the southern schools is very disruptive to many families in our community. Resolving split issues or a small change to the FRL ratio at Mountain View may not make a significant difference, except to create larger classrooms when overcrowding is already an issue in our district. This is especially if you are considering adding more students to Hazeldale to fill their new school capacity. My preference is that we continue to focus on making real changes at Mountain View Middle School, such as keeping class sizes low and improving the curriculum. Let's not disrupt future Mountain View students for such an inconsequential change. I urge the Boundary Committee to stay within the parameters of the original charter to fill the new middle school and to focus on the overcrowding in the northern part of the district. Thank you very much for considering this mom's point of view.
Thank you, Mrs. Pineda. All right, next on my list, I have Mr. Hart.
Hello, can you hear me?
Yep, please begin.
Thanks for allowing me to express my opinions tonight. Appreciate it. I'm a parent from Mountain View with 2 students, one in 6th grade, one in 8th. I'm aware of the attempts to change the student demographic at Mountain View, and I have some concerns. I listened to tonight's committee meeting. A lot of good points were raised. Some I agree with, some I do not. Currently, the forecast indicates that free and reduced lunch will change by 6%. If Cooper Mountain and Chehalem are swapped, I don't believe a 6% change will substantially impact the Mountain View quality of education and experience. The statistical fluctuations on a yearly basis make this small number unreliable. The Boundary Committee should carefully consider the math here before making such a major adjustment to this many families. The 6% change also does not take into account that Cooper Mountain families have a high level of mobility. If a change like this occurs, many families will simply just find alternatives such as private schools. The incremental change to the free reduced lunch numbers is so small in the forecast that we could potentially end up with a higher free and reduced lunch ratio at Mountain View. And this is simply an unnecessary change. The change is not worth the risk or the impact to Mountain View families. If I had to choose between the 3 options, I don't think any of the 3 options are viable. I think it should stay the way it is, but if I had to choose, the Gamma option would be my choice. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Hart. Okay. Ms. Relaford.
I'm here.
Great.
Thank you for providing me the opportunity to participate in tonight's middle school boundary discussions. Both my children are from Sexton Mountain and are now 6th and 7th graders at Highland Park. While my kids' school location is not directly impacted by any of the potential decisions, we will experience separation from the relationships that we've been building with Cooper Mountain families over the last 6 years. If you remove Cooper Mountain from Highland Park. My concern regarding this process is the Boundary Committee is supposed to follow its charter to fix overcrowding at Stoller and fill Timberland and then make minor adjustments elsewhere. Swapping two elementary feeder patterns does not sound minor. It actually sounds like it's just as big a decision, just as big as the decisions that have been debated in the North. Also, the justification for changing student demographic at a struggling middle school on the surface sounds noble, but when you look at the actual impact of the change, it won't move the needle significantly. If equity is the focus for the district, then we should be focusing on making changes across the entire district, not just at 2 schools in the South. Moving 2 elementary schools and the upheaval it will bring will not help our community. I hope we can focus on making some real change.
Great, thank you. Ms. Rilla, oh, geez. Sorry, I keep hitting the wrong button. I apologize for the dog barking in the background. Ms. Powers.
Hi. Can you hear me? Okay. I want to thank everybody for the chance to speak tonight. The way I see it in regards to the Lego example that we had at the last meeting, I think he said that you were given pieces of the Death Star to make the Millennium Falcon. But what I really think is that you were given instructions to create the Millennium Falcon out of Legos, and you were provided with Duplos. So Duplos are much bigger pieces, and they're not going to come together as nicely as tiny Legos. So you can make something that resembles the Millennium Falcon, but you can't expect it to be pretty. It's not going to be pretty, and it's not going to fit perfectly together. That said, I think there are important priorities, and a major one for me is that lower income areas within walking distance to a middle school should go to that school. And this current map mostly does that. I know Michelle mentioned the middle school student missing a bus. And if you're a lower income middle school student and you miss the bus, you most likely don't have parents that can drive you to school, where a higher income area would. And those kids, we can't have them missing school because of economic issues. This also applies to the south area of Sato. This area for Stoller is a large area of diversity and a large area of economic disadvantaged students, and they can walk to Stoller. I really, if this area is brought up again, believe that they should be prioritized over the walking area of Findlay or the bust area of Springville, because these kids have a school that they can walk to, and it's important for them to retain that ability. I have more to blow up the whole map, but I think it's pretty much good, and we should just move forward. Thanks.
All right, thank you, Ms. Powers. We will now go to Mr. Pack.
Can you hear me okay?
Yes.
All right, thank you, Steve, and to the committee who are volunteering your time. The purpose of my testimony is to share the consensus of my neighborhood against vote 3 from March 12th that recommended a new elementary boundary adjustment process around Stoller, specifically to consider adding a part of the existing Findlay attendance area to Jacob Wismer. Our neighborhood is in one of the grid codes across from Stoller. We ask you to please reverse your decision on vote 3 based on the following 4 reasons. Number 1, moving 3 grid codes from Findlay to Jacob Wismer would exacerbate the overcrowding issues at Jacob Wismer. Findlay currently has a declining student population, so it would not make sense to move students from a declining population at Findlay to an overcrowded Jacob Wismer. Breaking up elementary school communities, which have formed over many decades, does not seem worth the potential increase in walkability when there is not a consensus of wanting to do so. Number 3, given the current environment and our responsibility to conserve time and resources at the district, we do not believe initiating a new boundary process is a prudent use of limited resources. Number 4, recommending an elementary boundary adjustment process would continue to leave our kids in limbo, not knowing where they will attend school next year, creating unnecessary stress during a time where our children are already facing a very challenging emotional time. Based on these reasons, we ask you to please rescind your decision on vote 3 and not recommend an elementary boundary adjustment process. We request the committee to please revote on vote 3 and to rescind your decision. Thank you for your time.
Great. Thank you, Mr. Pack. All right, next I have Spring Patterson. You're on mute. There you go.
Saying of the year. Got it. Hello, I'm a parent of 2 Oak Hills Elementary students, and I'm here to represent the collective Oak Hills community. Thank you for your commitment to this process. The finish line is in sight. You're almost there. As you enter the final phase of your work, we feel it is essential to remind the committee of the following. Earlier this year, we shared with the committee about how Oak Hills Sunset-bound students currently know less than 1% of the student body when they enter high school. This graphic behind me demonstrates the current isolation that our students are experiencing. The students in red come from Oak Hills when they enter Sunset High School, knowing nearly nobody. Thank you for recognizing the importance of ending isolation for our students in your March vote. Please maintain Oak Hills East Sunset-bound students with Terra Linda Elementary School at Timberland, and our Oak Hills West Westview-bound students with Bethany Elementary School at Five Oaks in your final boundary map to the board. The data tonight in your packet validates that Oak Hills Elementary School and Barnes Elementary School students do not interact due to the dual language program at Meadow Park and do not go into the same high schools. The current feeder pattern for Oak Hills Elementary School at Meadow Park is unacceptable. I also want to remind the committee that SUMA is not a set objective as clarified by the district. There is a committee member with a personal mission to consolidate SUMA at Timberland and are targeting Oak Hills East students to make the numbers work. I urge committee members to hold each other accountable to ensure personal agendas do not get in the way of making decisions that are in the students' and community's best interest as a whole. Thank you for your time. Stay focused. The finish line is in sight. The objectives are reduce capacity at Stoller, clean up the feeder lines for high school, and fully load Timberland. SUMA is not a consideration or part of your objective. Thank you so much. You're almost there. Stick with it.
Thank you, Ms. Patterson. Okay, I had 2 more names that we pulled from the hat that had submitted their name for submitting public testimony. I'm looking in the general direction of Melissa. Have those 2 people, Ms. Miles and Mr. Smith?
Nope, they did not log on.
Okay, so with that, we're going to conclude the public testimony portion of this meeting. On our agenda here, we have we've taken the votes on the middle school attendance boundaries. I note the time as 8:30, which is the end of our meeting, and I would like to indulge our committee just for a few moments because we can save this decision for the next meeting. But I would like to hear your thoughts and your initial thoughts on the legacy student concept that is outlined in your staff report. And if there are additional thoughts of or questions that you have that you want answers to, now's the time to raise them because we are going to have very little time to prepare anything. As our staff report notes, our recommendation is to, if you were to recommend a legacy program, it would be for only those students that are entering 8th grade next school year. So with that, I leave it open to the floor to raise any questions or comments. And Mike, I saw your hand first.
Also, Sharice has her hand raised.
Okay, so we'll go Mike, Jason, Sharice.
Yes, thank you, Steve. In terms of providing information, I would like to know if and what the impact would be if we were to add 7th graders to the legacy list. So 7th graders and 8th graders. if we could have that information at the next meeting, I think it'd be helpful.
Okay, thank you. Jason.
My concern was with the last recommendation, which was that you would lead to for a family where they wanted to take advantage and allow their 8th grader to finish at their school, that a sibling would not be allowed to attend the same school, which would result in families having 2 kids or more at different middle schools. I don't think that's in the best interests of families, and I can't imagine that the numbers where this situation would really take effect would justify us making that hardline decision. Families should not have kids forced to have kids at 2 different schools.
So, Jason, thinking out loud here, if you had a student who was an 8th grader and a student who was a 7th grader, one's going to, I don't know, one's staying at Stoller and one's going to 5 Oaks, let's say. I understand that sibling legacy. Are you extending it to include sibling legacy of, you know, the student who's in 8th grade next year who has a sibling in, let's just say 5th grade? Would you extend that sibling legacy to that person, or does the sibling have to be in middle school?
But I think the scenario I want to avoid is where you've got 2 middle schoolers at different schools. So the 8th grader and the 5th grader, I don't think we extend it, because you would then have a high schooler next year and 1 middle schooler.
Okay, so I am interpreting your request then for families that have children in middle school, that it's 8th grade. But if you have a student who is going to be in 6th or 7th grade starting next year, would be able to extend that legacy option to them as well.
Yep, and in the rarest of conditions where we've got the literal Von Trapp family, and there's just a whole line of them that'll go back 10 years, well, then we just keep doing it. It's just not going to happen often enough for us to force this hardship on any family.
Okay. Charisse.
Steve, I'm sorry, I don't mean to interrupt, but we have Michelle and Christy as well after Charisse.
Okay, thank you.
Before we go down the legacy rabbit hole, before we heard public testimony, you had mentioned talking about each middle school boundary as is on that map and putting that to a vote. Are we still doing that, or are we looking at that as our final map recommendation?
I'm not sure I'm following, because with the votes that you've made here tonight, the boundaries are set in a preliminary manner, and that the final vote would be next week.
So what you're saying is that final map, gamma, correct, is the vote that we are going to put forward as the option, correct? I'm just clarifying, correct?
Yes, so gamma is the map where, again, it's all of Cooper Mountain maintains its existing flow or feeder. Chehalem West goes to Mountain View, and Aloha Huber will be added to Mountain View.
And we will get the enrollment data for that before our next meeting, all the final numbers, correct?
That's correct.
And the projections will come from where? And will they include all of the current numbers where we have students not enrolled? Those big numbers we were talking about earlier.
So to the extent that we have that data geocoded, it will reflect what we have, yes.
Okay, that's why I wanted to know, thank you.
Okay. Michelle.
What are we doing about transportation for legacy students, or what is being offered? Or is that part of the discussion?
That would have to be part of the discussion. I would ask Mr. Beaver to come on right now to provide some history on what we've done with legacy students, the most recent of which was the El Monica elementary school, but maybe high school has some bearing on this as well. So Mr. Beaver.
Typically what happens, well, in this respect, we would be forced to continue with existing routes as they stood today, this year, for example, if we were going to school. And then we would be adding the new routes for next year for the kids that are coming into the incoming 6th graders and 7th graders that would be transferring schools. We would be adding those routes. So we'd maintain existing routes, or as be honest with you, as few as we could, in order, based on who was staying, to get them there. I'd like to take opportunity real quick and just, I was just curious about, if going back a little bit, you said, okay, so we have somebody that's going to the 8th grade and we want to extend it to a sibling that's, say, going into the 7th grade. Well, then the following year, when the 8th grader departs, then what? Then the 7th grader is going to stay again. Is that what you're saying? Is that what you're proposing?
That's how it would work. And using
so we would have to have 2 or 3 years of legacy transportation. Is that what
it could even be longer under the Von Trapp protocol, where you have a student who's in 8th grade now, and or it would be in 8th grade next year, but who has siblings in, say 6th, 4th, 2nd, and K. That, as I understand Jason saying, is that family would be, have the option to legacy all their students going to one middle school as that happens. Now, I also understand under the Von Trapp protocol that if there is a broad enough gap where there is no Von Trapp going to that middle school, they will go to their new school. There is no legacy on that. It is the legacy is to prevent families from having to go to 2 middle schools concurrently.
Right. And so let's say we have the Von Trapp legacy, then transportation would be expected all the way down the line then for one family.
I'll chime in there and say I don't think that that's necessarily a requirement. I think it's reasonable to cut it off at some point.
Well, again, I would just urge the committee members to think of that concept, because again, state law says if they're more than 1.5 miles away and they attend the school, and that's their school of attendance, then we're required to transport them. So we may not have the option just to say, okay, that's it, it's over, if that's what we're saying. So I would urge the committee to take that into account in their deliberations.
Okay. Thank you, Mr. Beaver. All right. Is there anybody else?
We have Christy and Monica.
Okay, so Christy first.
Thanks, Steve. So I have 2 questions. They're unrelated, but I'll start with the legacy student questions first, since that's kind of what we're all talking about now. For the 8th graders, would they be required to stay at their existing school, or could they choose to go to the new school that they're assigned to? In other words, switch to the new school.
Sorry to interrupt. The legacy would be an opt-in program. So everyone would be designated to go to their new middle school unless they inform the district that, no, we want to go to, we want our 8th grade or future 8th grade student to remain at their middle school.
Okay, so in other words, a family who has siblings close enough that they would go attend middle school together, they could opt to choose to go to the new the different middle school, new middle school for instead, so they could stay together.
Correct.
Okay. So my second question was actually related back to the vote we did in March regarding the elementary adjustment for Finley. Are we going to re-vote on that at some point?
Yes, I made a note to myself here in that testimony that is a lingering question, and I would like to bring it back to the committee for a final determination, if you will, at the next meeting.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, I'm sorry, was it Michelle or Monica that was next?
It's Monica.
Monica.
It was me, but I had a similar question and it's answered, so.
Okay. All right, anyone else on that matter? Okay, seeing none.
We have no one else.
Okay, seeing none, here's how we're going to proceed. Our next meeting is a week from today. I like to get materials to you as quickly as possible. And Robert and I won't speak for Robert, but after this meeting, I'm going to start writing, and I'm going to start working on materials for to get to you as soon as possible. You understand where we are with the map, and I will post that map to you tomorrow. We can send it to you right away, just saying, okay, based on the votes, here is the map. We will continue to work diligently on information that you need to consider in looking at it for the final vote. So that means updating the tables and things like that. What we will do at the meeting is we will have a brief discussion of, recap of this meeting, a brief discussion of the map as it has been preliminary recommended. We will then open up the public testimony, and we will have people come in, much like they did tonight, to provide testimony on this final map. Once that's done, we will then go into any final questions, final comments. We will take the vote, for example, on the elementary school issue. We will ask about the Highland Tail issue, and we will also talk about legacy. At the end of that discussion, we will have a vote on the map. We won't go through and look at every issue necessarily unless the committee wishes to reopen something, and we would need to have a majority to do that. But we will be looking at the map as it is today, based on the votes that you've taken. So please expect to see us give you that information as soon as we can. And for those people that are on, watching, we will post it on our webpage as soon as we can, so everyone will have an opportunity to see what is, what is being proposed, what is being recommended to the superintendent, and what is obviously going to be considered for that final vote as a recommendation to the superintendent. So with that, are there any other questions before we adjourn?
Steve, we have 3 hands. We have Charisse, Yasmin, and Divya.
Okay, so ladies first, Jason, and so we will go with Charisse first.
So if, based on the numbers that come back down, that this recommendation does not meet the objectives we were given and or does not pass the committee, what happens next?
We will take it to the superintendent saying the committee, this is the result of the committee, and we will say it, that they cannot recommend it because of it doesn't meet the objectives or the factors or whatever it might be. And if that's the majority vote of the committee, that's what we will present. Okay. Yasmin.
Sorry to take you back to the issue of legacy again. I'm trying to understand it. It's a little puzzling for me. So if we have only 8th grade going, will be as legacy students, this means we have the routes, the extra routes, bus routes for 1 year. And if we have them, if the legacy students are the ones going to 7th and 8th grade, that's 2 years. And then 6th, 7th, and 8th grade, that's 3 years of extra bus routes. And if we have in mind the siblings, this will create more and more years. Do I get this correctly, or I'm not sure I understand. I want to understand fully how legacy works so that next time I have it clear in my mind.
Mr. Beaver.
Yes, you are correct, ma'am. That if it were 7th and 8th grade, then it would be extra bus routes for 2 years, 3 years. And in the case of the Von Trapp family, it could be 7 or 8 years.
Okay, thank you. All right, Deborah, you gave me 3 names, and I'm forgetting who the last lady was.
It's Divya.
Divya, sorry. Divya, please.
A couple of questions, both unrelated. So back on the legacy topic, that was not my understanding. I thought if the student is entering 8th grade next year, they get to choose or make an option between the new and the existing boundary. But anybody entering 7th and 6th, I thought will be going to the new boundary, middle school. So can you please define?
So what we have outlined in the staff report is that it would apply only to students who are in 7th grade now and would be in 8th grade next year.
Okay.
What has been requested is what would be the impact if it were extended to 7th grade? And then what would be, what would happen if it were extended to siblings regardless of, grade, just so that we don't have families going to 2 separate middle schools.
Right. Okay. So can we, next week when we vote, can we separate the 2, meaning take votes on 8th and then the siblings?
Yes.
And then 7th plus 8th, because I think they're independent topics and needed to be voted separately.
Yes, we can do that.
Thank you. The second question I had was, next time when we meet, I would like to hear from Mr. Struckmeyer about the neighborhood programs such as SUMA, as well as the option schools such as Rachel Carson. Given the current GAMA recommendation, where does he see these going? May not be the final call, but at least a directional feedback from him would be nice as a packet.
Okay, we can do that.
Thank you.
To the extent we can, recognizing that's a decision that will be made by teaching and learning leadership in the coming months. So we may not be able to provide a succinct answer for you. Jason.
Yeah, thanks, Steve. So I'd just like to encourage everyone on the committee and frankly, anybody who's watching at home who is so inclined to please take a look at the document that was delivered to us today, showing the alarming drop of our student population and what that really means as far as the prospects for our district going forward. I do not think it's at all alarmist to say that we're facing what I call a fiscal cliff. And as many of us has expressed along the way, none of us would feel good about implementing something that was going to have a short lifespan and force the community to go through it again. And to that end, Steve, I mean, I asked you via email, and I hope maybe in the next meeting we can devote some actual time to further information on that. I mean, what confidence can you give, not to just the committee, but to the community, that this solution here is going to be a set of boundaries for this period of time? Because in my mind, it really weighs very heavily on whether we can recommend anything. Like I said, I don't care for this map. I will not vote for it. If we had the perfect map, I would not want to move forward if I thought we were going to have to be back here in 3, 5, whatever years? And I think that's a critical question to put out to the community, and it's the one the community has not been exposed to, because literally we got the document today. Regarding the map, I would ask all of the committee members to really look at it and consider something I brought up all along, which is we were given a very hard task of having to take a very large chunk of the existing population out of Stoller. But somehow we've landed on a solution where we've caused far more change at 5 Oaks, Meadow Park, Cedar Park. I encourage you to spend the next week, think of yourselves, how are you going to explain that to those communities? Why are we doing that? I don't have an answer. And I'll just finish up with a very personal note, which is I was very pleased throughout this to see the committee embrace what I'll call the Rock Creek situation, not wanting to have them be, essentially orphaned. And then we took on very similar perspectives on both halves of Oak Hills. My home area is West Walton View Elementary School. And this map has done exactly that to that community. Fun little scavenger hunt. You guys go look in the map, find another elementary school that is assigned to neither its closest high school or middle school. If there's another one, there's not many. I don't know that I've heard the words West TV come out of any one of your mouths throughout this. It's unfortunate I have to be the one to do it because people will discount it because that's where I live. Thank you.
Thank you, Jason. All right. I want to be respectful of everyone's time. Looking at the clock here, is there anyone else who would like to have any kind of closing request, comment, question, or anything like that? Okay, seeing none, I will thank you very much for your participation tonight, your thoughtful questions and comments. I will see you next week and continue this and reach a conclusion, whatever that might be. I would ask that the staff stay on for just a moment. And with that, we will close the meeting. And again, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.